What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, October 8th, 2018, start of a brand new week. And boy, busy news day. We've got a lot of stuff to get through on the talking points here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. Obviously, today is Columbus Day. It is a federal holiday. The banks and post office are closed. Few more businesses are closed. Most are open, especially in the retail sector. And it's kind of interesting why we call it Columbus Day, because we now know Columbus was not the first European to reach North America. The Vikings did it 500 years before him. And the Vikings, on their eastward expansion, interacted with the Muslims, traded with them, and told them about this large land mass on the other side of the ocean. They in turn interacted with the Templars and told them. So the Templars knew it was there as well. And Columbus' wife, as it turns out, was a member of a Templar family. And if you will recall the popular representation of Columbus ships, the cross of the Knights Templar is on the mainsail. So there's a little bit of a history there. A lot of people saying it's time to stop calling it Columbus Day and call it Indigenous Peoples Day because of, well, they were obviously the first humans to reach North America. You know, it's like Columbus steps on the beach and says, I am here for Europe. I am the first European here. And all those other Asians who got there 20,000 years ago, they just don't count here. So anyway, if you are in Florida, they're already starting to order evacuations for this tropical storm Michael. They're predicting it's going to reach at least Cat 2 hurricane status, winds up to 100 miles per hour. So there's a state of emergency has been declared for 26 counties in the Florida Panhandle and the Big Bend area. So again, you poor Floridians, you've already been through this, but you know what to do. Okay. All right. As you probably are already aware, on Saturday, Brett Kavanaugh was finally confirmed to the Supreme Court, and we were hoping that was going to be it. Let's move on to other stories. Sadly, it was not to be. The liberals apparently taking their cue from Hillary, who still can't get over the fact that she lost in 2016. They're out there screaming and crying and wailing and tearing their hair out. Oh, how could this be done? And just getting really radical out there. And a lot of people are now starting to come out and say, well, you know, Kavanaugh was not the most constitutional choice that Trump could have made, and there are issues with the Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment, all of which are valid and all of which should have been the subject of those hearings. But the liberals just focused on the fact that Kavanaugh might vote against abortion should it come before the Supreme Court again. Nobody really knows for sure how he's going to vote, but that was the fear. And so they just launched this politics of personal destruction where they turned the entire hearing into this circus about all these women cheap, made the whole process look bad in the eyes of the world. And it's interesting how the liberal media is trying to spin this already, coming on out and saying the Senate votes against women, or the Senate says women can't be trusted. Well, women can't be trusted if they can't back up what they're saying. Neither can men. People lie. That's a reality. And they especially lie for political gains. And apparently, the New York Times on Saturday published an op-ed titled, "White Women Come Get Your People." And basically, the op-ed's author, Alexis Grinnell, was attacking Republican women, calling them gender traitors in league with the patriarchy. And it's still going on. Democrats are vowing a day of reckoning coming for the Republicans. And just, again, all these allegations, we can't trust the Senate Republicans to stand up to Donald Trump. Lindsey Graham is out there saying he's going to take the Kavanaugh fight to the streets. He's actually going to campaign against his fellow senators. which is something he normally does not do. Cory Booker is saying that if, in fact, the Democrats take the House of Representatives this November, which is 29 days away to the election now, that they should move to impeach him. It's not sure that they actually have something they can impeach him for, because he hasn't really started the job yet. He just got sworn in over the weekend, and the liberals were literally clawing at the door of the chamber where he was being sworn in. And other liberals are out there saying, okay, it's time to put this behind us all, because after all, it's nothing personal, Brett. It's just business. These false rape accusations, don't take it personally. We're just trying to do our job here. I have a feeling, it's only a guess, but I have a feeling that Kavanaugh's tenure on that bench will in fact be colored, if you will, by his memories of how he was treated. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. We're talking about Kavanaugh's confirmation, and still the noise continues. The liberals are out there, and apparently over on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, one of the writers actually tweeted on out saying, whatever happens, I'm just glad we ruined Brett Kavanaugh's life, and caused a big stir. The writer deleted the tweet and apologized for it, saying it was a tone-deaf attempt at sarcasm, which, no, it didn't come across as sarcasm. One of the big issues, of course, everybody's looking at is how is this going to affect the midterm elections? Obviously, both the Republicans and the Democrats are trying to exploit this. The Democrats are trying to say, we want revenge. We will have our revenge. We will take the Congress away from them, And the Republicans are realizing that this victory for the party, for Trump, is energizing the GOP base. So polls are showing that the gap between the Democrats and Republicans is narrowing rapidly. We've got 29 days more to go, and now the serious campaigning is underway. So we'll see what's going to happen. But I'll tell you right now, I have a real problem with a political party that is campaigning for Congress based on the idea of revenge because they didn't get what they wanted. That's not a good way to be running a government. Interestingly enough, some of the stuff that was going on in the background, over at the University of Southern Maine, there was this professor, Susan Feiner, who literally created a one-credit, tuition-free pop-up course called Engaged Citizenship, in which students would get this credit to harass Susan Collins regarding Kavanaugh. And there's been a huge amount of harassment. Some of the stuff that's gone up on Twitter, it's vile. I can't even say some of it here on the radio because of the FCC. And things like, we're coming for you, enjoy your remaining days in the Senate, we're going to rip you from that seat. A lot of profanity here. Just vile stuff, absolutely vile stuff here. And public discourse has just gone uncivil to the edge of violence, and that's got a lot of people worried. So let's step back for a second here and pose a serious question. What if, in fact, Christine Ford lied? None of the people that she called as potential witnesses to confirm her story would confirm it. They all said they had no information to confirm it, or they knew for a fact it didn't happen. And we're sinking into this whole Me Too generation where there are still people out there saying that women should be believed. The accusation equals guilt. Even innocence is no defense if you're accused of sexual assault. Now, obviously, in this case, they failed. But what's to be done about it? What's to prevent the liberals, or for that matter, anybody else, any other female who doesn't like a candidate or doesn't like a nominee from coming on out and playing the same vile trick again. They're going to get a lot of media attention, going to get a lot of money through their GoFundMe account. How do we stop this kind of behavior from happening? And it's reaching hysteria pitch, this idea of women must be believed. And a reminder, we went through this in the 1990s with the militant feminist male bash situation, the rape crisis, which turned out not to exist, and this idea that women had to be believed and men had to be sent to jail even if there was no evidence of their guilt. And innocent men went to jail. And many of these rape accusations back in the 1990s were finally revealed to be fraudulent. So yes, in fact, women will lie about this. Now, over at the University of Southern California, there was a professor who came on out. His name is James Moore. And he said that, accusers sometimes lie. And he was out there saying, if the day comes you are accused of some crime or tort of which you are not guilty, and you find your peers automatically believing your accuser, I expect you find yourself a stronger proponent of due process than you are now. And the students are calling for this guy, who's tenured, by the way. They want him fired. How dare you say the accusers lie? We want him fired. Worse than that, get the stake and the kindling wood here. We'll just burn him alive right now. Out here in Hawaii, our Senator Mazie Hirono seems not to understand corroboration, and she's still pushing this idea that she absolutely believes Christine Ford and the other ladies. That they don't need to have any proof. The burden of proof was on Kavanaugh, and there was no corroboration that he didn't do any of these things. And she tried to claim there was corroboration of Christine Ford's story, which is an absolute complete falsehood. So Mazie Hirono kind of shot herself down there, saying that women don't lie by lying. But we're seeing our Congress, our politicians, basically descend into an angry mob, a mobocracy. All right. Alan Dershowitz is being very critical of the ACLU, which, when it was first starting up, it was cash poor and principled rich. And based on the way the ACLU went after Kavanaugh, Dershowitz has declared the ACLU, it's very cash rich. It's never had more money, but it's now principle poor. I guess with enough money, anybody can be convinced to change their opinion. They might use that little method that Christine Ford came up with, self-hypnosis, to change your own memories. Oh yes, we've always been at war with East Asia. And basically the ACLU's National Policy Director and former Democratic Party operative Faiz Shakir was asked why the ACLU got involved in the Kavanaugh confirmation fight, and he came right out and admitted it. People have funded us, and I think they expect a return. So ACLU is now a political gun for hire. Donald Trump, of course, has got some very angry words for the crybabies, the snowflakes out there, saying there's this angry mob of radical Democrats, and it's become too extreme and too dangerous to govern. I agree with the too extreme, but Donald, you're the boss, and if you need to govern them, you've got the means to do so. So let's talk about some of the other things going on in domestic politics. I don't know about you. I'm sick and tired of Kavanaugh, and I hope this blows over now, because we really had too much of this thing. The big story that has been coming on out, this is reported in The Hill by John Solomon, and he's come on out saying that the redactions to these documents that the FBI and Department of Justice are being asked to release have nothing to do with national security. It's all about saving embarrassment. It's all about saving face. And because they've already admitted this entire Russiagate investigation was quite irregular. It didn't go by the normal procedure. We know that they used that bogus dossier from Christopher Steele to get warrants to which they otherwise were not entitled to. And the Department of Justice and the FBI, they don't want to be held to account for what they did. When J. Edgar Hoover was still in charge of the FBI, his #1 rule for all agents is never embarrass the FBI, a tradition which apparently has continued to this very day. Now, there's another article over at the Gateway Pundit saying that some of these FBI and Department of Justice redactions have to do with information that would implicate Hillary and the Democratic National Committee with ginning up this whole Russiagate investigation to begin with. So we'd like to see the end of Russiagate, although I'm sure the Democrats are going to be campaigning on it for the next 29 days. There's nothing there. The only international interference that was going on was Great Britain via MI6 agent Christopher Steele and the assets in Russia that he worked with. Robert Mueller has spent months and millions, and he's come up with nothing except a couple of procedural crimes against some of Trump's people that have got absolutely nothing to do with his original mandate. There's no there. And it is time for that investigation to go away. Now, here is a very interesting story. This came out of Newsmax. Apparently, there was this Republican opposition researcher who raised $100,000 in an effort to hunt down emails stolen from Hillary Clinton's private server. Activities that are under intense scrutiny by Robert Mueller in his investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. This came out of the Wall Street Journal. Now, Mueller may be especially interested in the researcher because he implied to those that he tried to recruit for the effort that he was connected to several Trump campaign officials, including Steve Bannon, Mike Flynn, and Kellyanne Conway. And here's where it gets dark. Apparently, 10 days after the Wall Street Journal report, Smith was found dead, and we have all been told it was just a tragic suicide. This sounds like a guy at the top of his game. You know, the Wall Street Journal is reporting on what he's doing. He's got the money to move forward. He's in his game. So I'm not buying the suicide. This is another one for the dead bodies list here. Now, as we gear up for the midterm elections, the Democrats who are known to be linked to CIA, which is a lot of them, they're campaigning on a war platform, war against Russia. They're running on pro-war campaigns, and I'm sure that that's part of the CIA's continuing push for the propaganda. It's on TV, it's in the newspapers, the candidates are out there saying it's time for war. I don't know if that might not backfire, because the American people, they're sick and tired of war. They're sick and tired of being lied into war. We understand that all of this Russia bashing is just propaganda. It's no more real than Saddam's nuclear weapons. So, remember when the Republicans were the war party and the Democrats were the party of peace? Okay, Taylor Swift normally doesn't talk about political views, but she has come on out and announced she's going to vote for the Democrats in a post attacking the appalling record of Tennessee Republicans. Taylor Swift was quoted as saying, "Transgender rights are Tennessee values. Vote Democrat." We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the Democrats are still whining and crying. I'm watching on Fox News right now where they're out there, we're going to impeach him. We're going to impeach him. You can't impeach somebody just because you don't like them or you don't agree with them. It doesn't work that way. There has to be an impeachable offense, and he's only just started the job. Now, there is this activist, if you will, and author, Molly McHugh. And she's been pushing the whole Russiagate. She's written hit pieces against the Gateway Pundit, Cassandra Fairbanks, Jack Prosobiec, Mike Chernovich, and other conservatives. Turns out is a registered agent of the Georgian government operating inside the United States of America. And according to Foreign Agents Registration Act filings, Molly McHugh has acted inside the United States on behalf of the anti-Russian Georgian government under the guise of a consulting company known as Fianna Strategies, LLC. So you got to be careful about these so-called experts out there. All right, let's turn over to the war zones. There's a lot going on there. We are continuing to see clashes between these different militant groups in western Aleppo. And the Idlib militants who are refusing to lay down their arms and continuing their attacks on government forces are being, to put it politely, eliminated. This is coming from Russia's Special Presidential Representative for the Middle East, Mikhail Bogdanov. And he stated that Russia and its partners, including the internationally recognized government in Damascus, have repeatedly declared this position. They're just wrapping it up. Okay? Now, there's a little bit of a stink building between Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and it has to do with a dissident who went missing at the Istanbul Saudi consulate. And apparently the body was eventually found and showed signs of torture and even dismemberment. And this dissident happened to be a Washington Post columnist as well. And this is stirring up tensions between Riyadh and Ankara. So we're getting into an era of wet work, I think. And frankly, given the fury of the Democrats right now, I hope Kavanaugh's robes are Kevlar. Because if you look back at the highly suspicious death of Scalia, it's right out of the Pelican Brief. To get what you want, whack a Supreme Court judge. Now, back in 2008, there was this little kerfuffle in South Ossetia. And it involved tanks and a lot of unhappiness. Russia is basically trying to approach Georgia about renormalizing relations between the two countries and say, look, you know, it was 10 years ago, and Georgia is saying, no, we carry a grudge here. The Saudi-led coalition is sending additional forces to Hodeidah to bolster up their forces. And apparently these forces are from Sudan. And the Sudanese servicemen will reinforce troops already deployed there in order to fully liberate the territories which remain under the Houthis' control. Don't you just love the way they use the word liberate? That's not what's going on here. Years ago, the United States staged a successful regime change in Yemen. The people of Yemen didn't like being under puppet rule, and they kicked the puppet government out. That's the Houthis taking back their country. And Saudi Arabia, acting as a proxy for the United States, went back on in to slap the Houthis down and get the people of Yemen to accept being ruled by a foreign-controlled government. That's what's really going on. They're not liberating anything. They're stealing it. Let's call it what it is here. Over in India, in an act of defiance to U.S. domination, India has signed a deal over $1 billion worth for the S-400 missile. They've signed that deal with Russia, and apparently, when the Russians asked about the American sanctions, India said, yeah, there could be sanctions on us, but we follow an independent policy. So the problem with sanctions is you overuse them, they lose their fear factor. And I think that's what's starting to happen. Story coming out of Mondo Weiss. Apparently, Nidal al-Azza is a Palestinian activist and the director of a local organization that works with Palestinian residency and refugee rights, saying that Trump's policies in Palestine are fueling the rise of a new political movement. They're unifying Gaza. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and finishing up with what's going on with Israel and Palestine. One of the most powerful tools that Israel has developed is the so-called Christian Zionists, who are Christians who are fully supportive of everything that Israel does. And apparently Christian Zionists are now targeting U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority. They're absolutely demanding that the flow of money stop. So much for Christian charity here. Sheldon Adelson is out there repeating a very old piece of propaganda, goes all the way back to Golda Meir. There's no such thing as a Palestinian. It's just made up to make Israel look bad, which is not true. And if you look at my article on the Maps Tell the Story, there's all these photographs and maps and everything that document it. And by the way, I'd like to take a moment here to send a thank you to everybody who over the months sent me things like Palestinian coins, postcards, books, real physical paper maps and everything about Palestine before the creation of Israel. And I finally connected with a museum in Palestine, and I donated it all to them. So that all of that stuff you sent is now going to be in a good home. Okay, Netanyahu has just announced, or he's just informed his cabinet, that the army is preparing for a possible military campaign against Gaza in case the situation does not improve. What does he mean by that? It means that the protesters stop protesting because it makes Israel look bad to the world. And for the past 6 months, the Palestinians have been protesting peacefully on the border of Gaza as part of the Great Return March. And Israel has just been killing and crippling these protesters. And they want the protesters to go away. And on that basis, Netanyahu is literally going to invade the place. All right, let's take a couple of phone calls here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike? Mike, I have a question for you. You talk about the S-4s that they're selling to India. First of all, why do you think the Russians didn't give the Syrians S-4s instead of just the S-3s? The other thing is, I see that the United States is now supplying Israel with more F-35s. I know you've talked about the 35s already.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, do you think these F-3s can take out these 35s, or what? Or do you think it's too much for those F-3s?
Well, I'm not an expert on the various systems in there. In answer to your first question, the reason why Russia sent the S-300 is that Syria and Russia had previously arrived at a deal for Syria to buy the system, and Israel prevailed upon Putin to delay the delivery and not allow the missiles in there. And Putin, following the shoot down of that Ilyushin 20, basically changed his mind and said, we're going to fulfill the contract. And that's exactly what happened. And now they have the S-300s in there. As far as what's going to happen when an F-35 actually goes into combat against a modern surface-to-air air defense missile, we're going to have to wait and see. Now, apparently, the Russians have been working very hard on getting around stealth. Apparently, I was correct in my assessment that the lower frequency radar you use, the less stealthy the airframe becomes. And the Israel's assessment of the S-300 capabilities is based on a very early version that was sold to Greece that Israel somehow got to inspect. We are not really going to know, given the poor performance and quality of the rest of the F-35. I'm not sure I have a lot of confidence in its stealth capability.
The Russians also have stealth planes, right?
Yes.
So, I don't know. Maybe they should sell the Syrians some of those stealth planes. You know? All right. You want to, go tit for tat, you know?
Well, I don't think Syria would be well advised to do tit for tat. I mean, what Putin, Assad is trying to end the war and get back to just running his country. Putin does not want to provoke Israel and the United States. And so what Syria is getting are primarily defensive weapons systems. Yes, the United States is sending F-35s to Israel, which are offensive weapons.
I don't know. It seems to me that until Israel gets the message that they will themselves face a certain amount of destruction when they attack other countries, until they get that message and stop being so arrogant and maybe getting rid of a criminal like Netanyahu, and until that happens, I'm afraid that this is just going to continue. Because they are bullies, Israel. And they're using it, like we're their big brother, the United States their big brother, even though the big brother is controlled by, kind of like pulled around by his nose.
Yes.
And it just keeps on going on. And unfortunately, people just don't seem to understand this in this country. As far as the Christian Zionists, they're just as bad as the Jewish Zionists. I mean, these are fanatics. These people think that their Messiah, whichever Messiah that they believe in. The Jews believe in some other kind of Messiah. And the Christians, of course, think Jesus is going to return to his. I guess he's going to sit at the top of the Temple Mount as his throne after the world is complete. I should laugh, but it's just so crazy, and people actually believe this after the world is actually destroyed in Armageddon, as if there's anything. Well,
that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen because Jesus did try and come back, but he got chopped up and sold for medical experiments by Planned Parenthood.
Oh, God. I mean, but the sorry thing is people, I believe that both Pompeo and Pence actually believe this nonsense.
There are unfortunately a lot of people, and this especially among the Christian Zionists, who are absolutely convinced if they can bring about Armageddon, that Jesus is going to come on down and invite them all up to the big house. They're all going to get raptured up to heaven, and everything will just be hunky-dory. And it's amazing how many people, how many entire churches are based on this idea of actively working to bring about the end of the world. And it's a little bit scary that people like this are allowed to drive the streets.
It's not just that. There are people in high places that believe this dribble.
Yeah.
It's like I said. And now the only way you're going to bring about something like that is in a thermonuclear war.
Exactly.
And what is just the country to give you that thermonuclear war if you keep on pushing them and pushing them. China also, but I don't think China has the ability to totally annihilate us. I don't think they have that many weapons, but Russia does, and we have, of course, to do it to them. So plus,
you need to understand, China may have fewer nuclear weapons, but they're a lot bigger and a lot more powerful because of the notorious inaccuracies of their missiles. If China were to hit Oahu with one of their standard nuclear weapons, the entire island would vanish.
You're saying they have larger weapons than the U.S. and Russia then?
Yep, they do. Russia and the
United States.
Russia and the United States have moved away from the really powerful strategic nuclear weapons, and the emphasis has been on tactical nuclear weapons of smaller yield. Because the targeting has shifted away from huge population centers, obviously, to military facilities, which are a lot smaller. And you want to take them out completely, but you don't need 3 megatons to do that.
I see that, for instance, what's his name, Mr. Ung there in North Korea?
Yeah.
Supposedly the thing that destroyed that mountain, or destroyed a good portion of that mountain, was a 100 megaton bomb. I mean, geez.
I don't think so. I think it was multi-megaton, but there's only ever been one 100 megaton bomb that was ever built. That was the Tsar bomb by Russia, and they were so scared of it when they tested it, they dialed it back to 50 megatons.
You really got to wonder whether about the sanity of the leaders of this world. I mean, you really got, especially the people we've got in this country right now, and what you've got in Israel, and these people are actually madmen, and the EU too. So part of the EU. It's just it's a bad formula. Right? This is worse than during the Cold War, because the Cold War.
And complicating, as I've said before, so many of these weapon systems are now automated, and on computers, you could have a problem with the software, and something bad could happen before a human could even begin to intervene. Anyway, listen, Mark, we're going to let you go. The phone lines are loading up, and I got a lot of news to get through today. So let's switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Does that mean all the bunkers won't be used by Nikki Haley and all them, so they'll let us go into the bunkers? So it's just going to be waiting outside, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But, I remember during the first Cold War, the government actually did maintain bomb shelters for the general population. They've all been allowed to decay. There's no more civil defense. They just don't care. They've got their bunkers, and the ultra-wealthy have their private bunkers, and they figure they're just going to wait it on out and come on out, and the world will be beautiful again. Of course, they could come on out to an absolutely dead biosphere, which means sooner or later, after they eat each other for a while, they're all going to starve to death, and that will be the end of the human race.
Because everybody will taste like chicken.
Yes.
Yeah, Mike, stealth fighter for Russia's Su-57, and then the S-300 version 4 is what Syria got. And just because India is getting the S-400 doesn't mean the S-300 version 4 is less capable. It could be more capable because all it has to do with radar upgrades and all these other things. So there's different versions of models, and Russia's not going to give their top-of-the-line S-400 with all the bells and whistles to anybody but Russia, So
yeah, that's generally the way it works. I think the main difference between the S-300 and the S-400 is the S-400 is larger and has a longer range.
And Mike, how long has it been now since Israel's flown a flight over into Syria? It's been like going on 3 weeks about now?
Well, it's certainly they haven't tried it since the S-300s showed up. And Israel's threatening we're going to destroy those missile sites. They haven't tried yet. Part of the problem, of course, is that for at least the next 3 months, Russian personnel are operating those defensive systems while they train up the Syrian forces. And attacking Russian nationals, killing Russian nationals, is what escalated the situation in the first place. And I don't think either the United States or Israel wants to do that. But in the end, I think the most likely scenario is simply going to be that the United States will overwhelm the S-300 with a massive cruise missile attack until Syria runs out of the missiles. And at that point, Israel can fly back on in and destroy the sites on the ground.
Yeah, but you also have the S-200s over there that can take out some. You also have the Panzer S-1, which is short and medium range. So, I mean, they do have firepower. So if Russia activates their S-400 at, Latakia, and, plus they got ships in the over there too. So,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to overwhelm 300 or so cruise missiles. But then that'd be just
but it's not like they're spending their own money to do it, right?
Yeah, that's true. Hey, Mike, with India, it was $5 billion. They made a military deal, and they also are getting ships and stuff over the next couple of years. So they made, they're making deals. It's hey, Mike, what do you make of? I mean, I know you talked about Kay Bailey Hutchinson being the NATO ambassador, just saying all this crap, and then also that former Navy SEAL guy, Zinke or whatever, the guy who's Department of Interior. I mean, is it like just, ignorance or stupidity? I mean, whatever happened to why would you just come out now and say that as a government? It's just you come out, even with Kavanaugh, the Democrats, and everyone's just coming out and saying crap now. You know what I mean? It's in your face now. There's no behind the scenes.
Remember what George W. Bush said about catapulting the propaganda forward? That's what's going on here. It's just this massive, constant drumming of Russia, Russia, Russia into the eyes and ears of the American people, coming from everybody. To sell the idea that this is a good idea, that this is a consensus opinion, but it isn't. It's an organized PR campaign to demonize Russia ahead of a potential conflict, which I think is going to be a horrible mistake.
Mike, real quick before I get off the phone, you remember on 9/11, Christy Talmadge, well, she used to be the governor where I live, New Jersey. She was the head of the EPA. Remember that bull crap report said, oh, the air was fine. And then, you know what I saw on TV today on a commercial? Like if your child was like a victim from 9/11 for bad air quality, like a lawyer commercial. Yeah. So we all knew the air was, I mean, what a joke, but she had, this is how, it doesn't matter if a Democrat or, this is how deep these people go, like the deep state or just their class of people. They'll lie. That yes. EPA report was phony. I mean, a building comes down, it's full of all kind of chemicals and poisons and this or that, and it's just like I mean, and then you see this commercial, like how many years later? Remember all the firemen and all the workers who were cleaning up the rubble? They all got like cancer, right? I mean, a lot of them.
Cancers, mesothelioma, of course, from all the asbestos. And, of course, it saved Larry Silverstein a bundle of money because had 9/11 not occurred, he was being ordered to do a renovation of the entire complex to remove the asbestos. And that sort of thing had already bankrupted the owners of several other buildings in Manhattan who'd received the same order. So Lucky Larry basically made out that terrorists solved his asbestos problem, and the insurance companies bought him a brand new shiny building.
Yeah, what a coincidence. He had a doctor's appointment that morning, but yet the doctor says he didn't have no appointment. So, gee, I wonder if he got a phone call early in that morning, or maybe the day before. He knew. They knew. They were all part of the, not all of them, but there's just, they're not going to tell everybody. It was just like, you get a phone call, don't go to work. That's it,
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to start with Joe in Tennessee. Joe, I'm probably going to have to take you through the next commercial break. What's on your mind?
I saw about this car crash up in upstate New York, and it struck me as odd that many people died and nobody survived it. Well, there's a story out today that an FBI informant in terror sting owned the limo company in question,
yes.
And it was an Arab driver. And I just watched the National Transportation Safety Board have a press conference.
Okay,
they have yet to announce the drivers.
Got to put you on hold. I was watching the press conference as well. Got to put you on hold. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we're talking with Joe in Tennessee about this horrible limousine crash. And it's now come on out that the limousine had not passed its most recent safety inspection, was not even supposed to be on the road. Apparently, the driver was driving without a license. And now this other little wrinkle about how the actual owner of the limousine company is an FBI informant who was used to try and...
Yeah, that's...
Go ahead.
I sent you a link to your email from the Times-Union story about the FBI informant who was involved in 9/11 and also involved in trying to set up 4 men to blow up a Jewish synagogue. And you can read the article yourself and see how ugly it is.
Yeah,
I just find the whole reporting of the reporting of the story before I found out this was just odd that they never talked about the driver. It was always, and to have that many people die without any survivors, I have a feeling this was a suicide by some kind of a radicalized Muslim. And then I watched this press conference, and what a joke! I mean, all the questions were: when were the brakes inspected? Was it stretched? Did it get from? And I'm thinking, with this kind of information out there, nobody's going to ask them about the fact that the possibility that this was a form of terrorist attack or suicide mission. I mean, it bothers me. What bothers me most is the fact of the elephant in the room that's not being looked at. That to me stinks when I see that.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. From the description of the seats inside the limo that had literally torn loose from the floor, it was obvious that it was traveling at a very high rate of speed when it impacted.
Yeah, and it hit killed two people like pedestrians. So
yes.
Maybe he was gunning for them too. He figured, I'll take these people down along with the ones in my truck or my limo. This thing really stinks.
I agree.
I don't understand why when something like this happens, the NTSB gets in there. I'd rather have the local police and the local fire department tell us what happened, because when you send in the federal agents, no matter what branch of the federal government it is, their primary purpose is to cover stuff up and control the information.
Well,
and that's what I saw on that press conference. I've seen it before, and it stinks.
Well, we saw it all on TWA 800 between the NTSB and the FBI. They were out there absolutely, pushing the official story. Anyway, Joe, we're going to let you go. We're going to switch over to Frank in London. Frank, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was just I was wondering if one of the attributes of joining the Democratic looking to impeach Judge Kavanaugh, that's impossible. They haven't got the power to do it. I can't see where they get the political power to do it.
Well, if they succeed in taking the House of Representatives in the November elections, then as soon as the new Congress seats in January, is very much in doubt. It's going to be like Bill Clinton, who was impeached but not removed. Anyway, listen, we got to take a break for station identification. Thank you for the phone call, Frank. We'll be back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And now Mike Pompeo is out doing that diplomatic thing, and he's had a meeting with Kim Jong-un, who in turn has agreed to have a second summit with U.S. President Donald Trump as soon as possible. And Mike Pompeo met with Kim yesterday morning for around 2 hours of talks, followed by lunch before Pompeo flew to Seoul, South Korea, to make nice with them down there. So they have not agreed on a specific time or location, but Kim Jong-un is definitely making himself look good. He's up there with Trump. I'll tell you what would be really wonderful is if Trump and Kim Jong-un get together and Moon Jae-in joins them and they say, we're going to reunify, because that's clearly where they're headed. Now, Pompeo got a very chilly reception in China, which is not unexpected when you give the provocations involving the trade war, weapons to Taiwan, the continued incursion of U.S. military assets in and around the South China Sea. So the Pentagon is now accusing China of threatening America's national security. And it's all about not wanting any nation to compromise Washington's hegemonic agenda. It's aimed for unchallenged control. That's what's really at stake here. That was the goal of the Project for the New American Century back in the 1990s. That's what all the policy papers said. We're the only remaining superpower on Earth. Let's act like it. We're going to take control of the entire world. And the rest of the world is saying, no, looking at how you run your own country, we don't think that would be a really good idea. So things are not going well over there at all. And China basically admonished Pompeo that the United States should stop trying to play that they're the victim by saying China's a threat, or Russia's a threat, or Iraq is a threat, because it's very obvious who the aggressor is in the current context. Whether it's military or economic, we know who's pushing the buttons. Now, China's central bank is going to pump $110 billion U.S. into their economy to help it weather the United States trade war, which is continuing to intensify. And we're certainly starting to see it here in the stores. For any products that are imported from China, the price is going right through the roof here. Ron Paul is concerned over the stock market. saying that there is a 50% decline. It's coming. There is no way to stop it. And I'm in agreement with that because the market is hideously, hideously overvalued. Now, as you know, there is this so-called secret Saudi-Russia oil deal. And apparently Russia was working with the Saudis on Trump's order to aid the U.S. effort to halt Iranian oil exports without causing a supply shock. And it contradicts Russia's public promise to defend Iran's economy against aggressive U.S. sanctions. Well, I'm not sure the two are necessarily incompatible. Nobody wants an oil supply shock. That would upset economies all over the globe. But I think Russia has other ways of supporting Iran. And Russia understands, to the United States, all these countries are like a Chinese dinner. 30 minutes after you've had it, you want to have another. That's certainly the way they've acted over the last 17 years here. Now, this one is a little annoying. As you know, there is ethanol in gasoline, and there's EA10, which was the standard, and then they pushed it up to E15. And during the summer, there's a ban on selling the E15 gasoline, and Trump is now proposing to end that ban. Now, this appears to be a pander to the voters in Iowa, who produce most of the ethanol in the United States. And so they're going to be selling more ethanol to the gasoline companies. There's going to be blowback on this. Now, back when I had my Honda, before it got stolen by Vladimir Putin, we had to drive to a special gas station that sold ethanol-free gasoline for recreational devices, vehicles, and gas up there. Because with a car that was that old, the ethanol was going to destroy the fuel system. So newer cars are designed to tolerate ethanol, but only so much. And our current car will accept the E10 ethanol gasoline. There's a problem, though. In the instruction manual, it says explicitly, do not use any higher ethanol gasoline. It will damage the fuel system in the engine. And so here we have Trump that's pushing the E15 to get some votes, and all kinds of unnecessary repairs and upgrades to their cars if you go through with this. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And do you remember that pro-choice man who confronted this pro-life woman, got into an argument over the hypothetical case of what happens when a 15-year-old girl becomes pregnant through rape, should she be allowed to have an abortion, and wound up basically doing a roundhouse kick to her shoulder, knocking her phone to the ground. He's now trying to claim he was trying to aim at the phone. It was still an inappropriate thing to do, and the video from that went viral, and here's where the story gets better. Apparently, this same man has been committing acts of violence against other pro-life demonstrations, and he was recognized from the video. And so now he has been arrested, and he's looking at 8 different charges of assault. So, good. I'm hoping that will slow down some of these pro-violent liberals. Let's talk a little bit about political correctness. And having worked in advertising many years ago, I understand that sometimes the public just goes overboard with what they see in advertising. It sometimes makes it almost more trouble than it's worth here. But over at Oraz.com, they're talking about this hotel which had this full-page ad, magazine ad, placard ad, and all it was a young couple lying in bed with breakfast between them. And they've been forced to pull down the ad because it's sexist, according to the PCers. because the fruit was near the woman and the bakery goods were near the man. And, that's clearly sexist. And just a whole bunch of other complete and utter nonsense. And I think this story illustrates how hypersensitive the liberals have all been conditioned to be. It's like part of their identity now, that their entire sense of self-worth rests on always finding something to be offended about with which to go on the attack. That ad is sexist, you've got to take it down. The ad was done in good taste. The man and woman are fully clothed. They look like a young couple just waking up at hotel and having breakfast in bed. So, now this one is getting a little bit alarming, and this came out of Activist Post here. And it originates with the ACLU National Security Project from Hina Shamsi, who is the director of that project. And the gist of the story is the United States government is now blacklisting people based on predictions of future crimes. And, I mean, how Kafkaesque can you get? Where there are people who are being put on the no-fly list not because they have done something, not because they have bad associations, not because they've tweeted or Facebooked anything questionable, but because of some arbitrary prediction model that says somewhere down the road they might consider committing a terrorist attack. Now, the Supreme Court has already forced the government to inform people when they are put on the no-fly list, and to provide a mechanism to get off of it, although that mechanism is very, very hard to use. Their attitude is, once you're on that no-fly list, you stay there. That's the attitude here. And it's completely unconstitutional, but they keep running on this idea that our national security trumps the Constitution. No, that's not true. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. But this is right out of the movie Minority Report. You haven't done anything, but we're pretty sure you're going to. And if they get this to stick, what's going to be next? Civil forfeiture based on a prediction that you might engage in the drug trade in the future? Because civil forfeiture is totally out of control as well. There's a story we have on whatreallyhappened.com today about a guy who supposedly owns a jewelry store, and he was flying to California for a jewelry convention, which is a cash and carry operation, and they took his money. Didn't charge him with a crime, no evidence of wrongdoing whatsoever. They just took his cash and sent him on his way. Apparently up in New Brunswick, Canada, there has been some kind of an emergency at Canada's largest oil refinery. There have been several explosions. They're still trying to figure out, well, first of all, how to put it out, and second, what went wrong. Over in Minnesota, they've got 6 new cases of this polio-like illness diagnosed in children. Now, there was an issue with the oral polio vaccine some years ago, where it was using an attenuated polio pathogen, but it was found it could return to full potency once administered. And children started coming down with what looked like polio, but of course we can't call it polio, we can't link it to the vaccine, so it's polio-like, and they gave it a new name, acute flaccid myelitis. What are the symptoms? Well, the symptoms are just like polio here. Now, is there an issue with the vaccine causing the illness? We've certainly seen that happen before. Or is this polio-like illness been brought into the country through the refugee program? Those are both valid questions here. Over in Los Angeles, typhus is now reaching what are being called epidemic levels. The typhus can be passed from person to person. And again, the question is, was it brought into Los Angeles through the refugee program? And I was rather surprised to find out this has hit the city of Pasadena, which normally you would consider that's more upscale. So that's a serious situation down there. The debate over vaccines, of course, is continuing, and more scientists and researchers are coming forward to say it's not a robust technology. It's being handled very recklessly. And again, because the vaccine industry is indemnified from civil lawsuits, they can just go on making and selling whatever they want and put it onto the market. And if it does make people sick, well, you go to the vaccine injury court and they'll make it all better here. Over in Japan, they have ended their program for mandatory childhood vaccines. Their infant mortality rate has plummeted, and their children are healthier than children here in the United States of America. But vaccines make a lot of money, and the defenders of vaccines, like the liberals, they're getting violent. There's a story that came out of government slaves here, where there's this Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, she's a well-known advocate for vaccine truth, receiving death threats in an email message. And the message contained references to torture and a mass shooting event. There was a line in there, I'm going to kill as many of you blanks as I can before I go down. It's just terrible. It's like we're living under a government that's turned into the mafia. We're going to sell you products. We don't care if they work. We don't care if they even hurt you. We just want the money. Give us the money and nothing bad will happen to you. Everyone's still looking at NAFTA version 2.0, otherwise known as the USMCA deal. And it has offered far-ranging protections to the internet giants, protections from lawsuit. And it's basically saying that these are the same protections they enjoy under Section 230 of the United States Communications Decency Act. Basically saying that because they are acting as a conduit for other people's material, they cannot be held liable for anything that is objectionable or illegal run on their service, which I actually think is fair. If they are not creating the content themselves, they should not be held to account for it. But there is a wrinkle to that, because in order to take advantage of that, then social media has to be treated like a utility. And yet, with all this recent deplatforming and censorship, they're trying to act like a publisher. And the Communications Decency Act forbids that. You have to be one or the other. And if you're going to be a utility to take advantage of the legal protections over the content on your servers, then you can't be a publisher and you cannot act like one. So there's already a law in place with which to go after this social media and start saying you have to give equal treatment to all traffic passing through your utility. Over at Facebook, they're still reeling from what's called the worst hack ever. And they're talking class action lawsuit. EU regulators are investigating under the tough new GDPR rules that could see Facebook hit with a $1.63 billion fine. And lawsuits are being launched all over the globe here. Now, Facebook has been hit with yet another privacy issue, as the Federal Trade Commission complaint by advocacy groups accuses Facebook of harvesting data on children in the Messenger Kids app. And the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood and other groups asked the FTC to investigate the kid-centric messaging app for violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. Sounds to me like they did. Now, starting next year, Facebook will put advertisements on WhatsApp. And apparently Snapchat-style status feature will be interrupted with ads after Mark Zuckerberg bought it for $22 billion. All right. Tucker Carlson, love his show. He's doing great work out there. And apparently Tucker Carlson has obtained internal emails from Google and YouTube proving that, yes, indeed, they altered their search results for political reasons. Now, Google and YouTube have been saying, no, there was no politics involved. Yes, we're making changes to our search engine, but it's to provide a better user experience. And the emails show that, yes, they were using the search results to suppress videos based on their political content. So they've been caught red-handed doing this. And there's a big stink building about that one. And it's starting to harm them. People are turning off from Facebook and Twitter, and they're going over to the new alternatives like Gab. Okay, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Jessica Powell used to be the head of public relations for Google, and apparently she reached her breaking point and she left the company. She's penned a scathing Silicon Valley attack piece urging the tech giants to end the delusion that it's making the world a better place. And she's saying it's an industry that takes itself far too seriously and its own responsibility not seriously enough. I want Silicon Valley to end the self-delusion and either fess up to the reality we are creating or live up to the vision we market to the world each day. Because if you're going to tell people you're their savior, you better be ready to be held to a higher standard. I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree with that here. Wired Sources, which is a popular conservative news aggregation account whose slogan is, "They ignore it, we report it," has now been banned by Twitter. So, again, the bias is obviously there. All these Twitter accounts that are out there screaming about all the bad things that are going to happen to the Kavanaugh supporters, they're still out there. Okay, apparently Google is ending Google Plus following the revelation of that breach. So that's going to go away as well. Something else that Google had that I never used. All right, we have a little bit of propaganda, no, not propaganda, I'm sorry, a little bit of area of concern. This came out of QZ.com. Apparently, Great Britain is practicing cyber war games that could shut off the power in Moscow. This is coming out of the Sunday Times. And the measures they're trying to develop are a wide range of strategies to hit back at an increasingly aggressive Russia, which has been accused of interfering in the U.S. elections, cyber attacks on Western targets, blah, 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 poison the spy, blah, 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 blah. And so Great Britain is saying that this would be our way to attack Moscow without using a nuclear weapon. But again, who's being the aggressor here? And you've probably been seeing it on the news. It's all over. Russian cyber plots. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. And the United States, Great Britain, and the Netherlands are alleging all of this hacking. And here's the situation. Somebody who knows how to hack knows how to cover their trails. That's why they can never find the ransomware writers. The CIA has a hacking unit that is trained to pretend to be other countries when it does hack attacks. They can't really know. This is just more of, we know it's Russia. How do you know it's Russia? Well, we just know it. That's it. Accusation equals guilt. It's a new world. Get with the program. Now, the United States has indicted 7 Russian military intelligence figures for their alleged role in leaking Olympic athletes' drug test data and targeting organizations probing the poisoning of the Skripals in the UK. It's a Kremlin conspiracy. All right. Now, on the other side, of course, the CIA is now setting up one of their major hacking bases in Frankfurt, Germany. And this is coming out of WikiLeaks. They released a trove of 8,700 documents that reveal details of malware, viruses, trojans, weaponized zero-day exploits, malware, remote control systems, and associated documentation. And this facility in Frankfurt is the starting point for numerous hacking attacks on Europe, China, and the Middle East. And over here in the Daily Mail, elite North Korean hacking group is behind a wave of cyber attacks that stole hundreds of millions from global banks. And again, nothing to support that it was North Korea. It's just more North Korea bashing. Anyway, okay. The Times claims to have identified the Kremlin's latest secret weapon in cyber wars, codenamed Bikini Girl or Organic Erica. And this entity, if you will, may be a bot, because the posts are coming out on a regular basis. Oh, it's a bot. It must be Russian. Or it could be a young woman running an automated posting program. But she's working for the Russians. She's working for the Russians. What does she post about? Promotion of organic restaurants in Seattle. Environmental campaigning, particularly against pesticides and genetically modified food. No posts whatsoever on politics, foreign policy, or Russia. It's just nothing. But she's a Russian troll. It's a Russian troll. It has to be. Bad Russians. Bad Russians. No vodka. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And apparently the Pew Research Center last week released a new public opinion poll report on patient matching, which is a term that is a somewhat softer version of the National Patient ID. This is coming out of Citizens Council for Health Freedom. And Pew led off the study with this dubious claim about developing a national system of patient identification, which is declared as critical to achieving full promise of digital health records. And there are problems. First of all, a giant system like that, we've got hacking. Look what just happened to Facebook. We know that sometimes these biometrics don't work all that well. And I think medicine was a lot better when you basically just were known by your doctor and his medical staff, and they knew you and they had your file and they would treat you. But now having it all digitally everywhere, I mean, it's going to be great for the pharmaceutical and medical supply companies. They're going to harvest through that data and just hit you with all kinds of ads for whatever it is that you've got. There's a privacy issue here, because there are people who have conditions that they don't want to be publicly known. Now, there is a study that went out onto the dark web and found that you can get a new passport on the dark web for as little as $15. Now, that's a real price pick. In the past, forged or stolen passports would fetch a pretty hefty sum. And Comparatech analyzed listings on a handful of illicit marketplaces to try and determine exactly how much a passport or passport scan can fetch on the internet. And they were going like Dream Market, Berlusconi Market, Wall Street Market, Tochka Free Market, among others. And they discovered that passport scans, which are often enough for a scammer or criminal to set up a bank account in other people's name, can be purchased for as little as $15. Cybercrime is completely, totally out of control. And nobody in government seems to be all that concerned about it here. Here's something you should be concerned about. If you're on Windows 10, and if you do, you have my sympathies. This October update has had all kinds of problems. Apparently, documents are disappearing, not just going into the trash. I mean, literally being erased from the disk. And there are vanishing problems. One Windows 10 user, Robert Zico, claims to have lost 220 gigabytes of data after updating. Everybody's going to say, well, you should have, backed it all up. 220 gigabytes? And yes, you can do that with a couple of shirt pocket drives or a terabyte drive. But I mean, come on. Apparently, there's also an issue with the display audio drivers that send the CPU usage skyrocketing and the battery life plummeting. So Microsoft has now halted the rollout of the October update. And they're investigating and trying to fix it. Why didn't you make sure it was working before you released it there? Oh, well, because back in the days of the Apple computer and the IBM PC, our very wise and prudent government indemnified computer and software providers from civil lawsuits. That's why. So this article here, which appeared over in ZDNet, what happens next? Next, we need to restore product liability. We need to give these companies a financial reason to make sure their products are working correctly before they're put out there. A lot of people aren't even installing updates anymore. If they get their machine to a stable position, they turn off the automatic updates because of all these horror stories of machines being bricked or crippled or weakened. Battery life goes down. Functionality disappears. Now, as you may recall from last week, the Five Eyes nations are really pushing to mandate backdoors into all of our electronic devices so they can spy on us at will without a warrant, just because they're curious. And I imagine it'll be followed up with a ban on any non-standard encryption, like the codes that I wrote in my article on challenging the NSA. But you know something? The real criminals and the real terrorists are still going to get around it. All of this invasion of our privacy is not going to accomplish anything at all in terms of crime and terror. Apparently, there's a company, Phantom Secure, and their CEO has pled guilty to selling encrypted phones to organized crime, including the Sinaloa cartel. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. These banks, of course, are making a fortune off of catering to the Sinaloa cartel. And, of course, our government is treating with the Sinaloa cartel and making deals with them so they can smuggle weapons into them all. But the reason why I'm calling, Mike, is I'm having a hell of a time. As a matter of fact, I can't get onto your site anymore. I have an Amazon pop-up that comes on every time.
I know. It's one of our advertisers is breaking the rules, and I'm trying very, very hard to find out who it is. And what I'm having to do is turn off an advertiser and see if the complaints stop. And if they don't, then turn on that first advertiser and turn off the next one. But I am trying very hard to find, and they're going to great lengths to make sure I can't hunt down who they are. And the online advertising industry is really not well behaved. And I wish I could find it. I wish there was some expert who could help me track it down as to where it's coming. But one of the reasons the site loads so slow is these advertisers will go to one server, which bounces to another server, which bounces to another server, which bounces to another server, in order to obfuscate where the ad is originating. And it's almost like whoever's behind this campaign, they're trying to jam the site. And one solution would be for me to turn off all the advertising, but at that point, I would need a lot more donations to keep going. I wish some angel would come on in and fund what really happened so that I could tell all the advertisers to take a leap, because they're really much more trouble than they're worth.
Mike, I just want to point out, because with me, every time it's the Amazon pop-up. But Amazon, of course, owned by Jeff Bezos, who also is in charge of the cloud and a major partner of the CIA.
Yes.
Maybe that's not such an accident, but to me, it's clearly. I go to your site, have gone to your site every day for 20 years, and I can't get on now, and it drives me nuts. So I just wasn't sure if you were aware of it or not.
Oh, I'm aware of it. I've gotten a lot of emails from people who are seeing the problem. I've gotten a lot more emails from other people saying, no, we're not seeing it here. What browser are you using?
I'm not literate enough to talk to you about that. I'm on an Apple iPad is what I mostly watch you from.
Okay, so you're probably using Safari.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, I am really trying to figure out where this is going on, and I may reach the point where I just shut off all the advertising, and just have to live with that choice. But it really is out of control between advertisers who won't play by the rules, like no popovers. That's always explicitly stated every time I sign an agreement, and all the malvertising, where ads are carrying malware, and that's been a problem even for the big players like Facebook and Google. People talk about the wild, wild west out there in internet land. It really is very much like that. And we're supposed to have a sheriff, meaning the government, who's going to rein all this in, like the Federal Trade Commission, and they're silent. They're absolutely silent on this.
And the NSA, and of course, it's redundant. CIA, which has a redundant capability, but where are they? If they're not behind it, where are they in enforcing this stuff? So,
yeah, it's an issue. I'm really trying to find where this is coming from, and it's just a very laborious process, because again, the problem I have is I don't see it here, and whether they're filtering my IP so that I can't see the offending ads as another way of hiding it, I can't see it here. I keep one browser completely vanilla, just the way it was downloaded from their site. No add-ons, no plugins, no extensions, nothing. And I use it to check the What Really Happened website. The other thing that I do is I pay for a service that constantly scans whatreallyhappened.com for malware, and it says I'm completely clean. So we know it's coming in with one of the advertisers.
Well, whoever is doing it, Mike, is pretty sophisticated, obviously.
Yeah, it's very sophisticated.
Listen, I love you. I'm trying my best to listen and watch, but it's tough, man. But anyway, I wanted to let you know that for sure.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot here, and I wish I could find an expert in this sort of thing. Apparently, somebody called in and said Firefox's U-Matrix can allow you to identify bad actor advertisers through selective server enabling, and yeah, because it's a problem. It is a real problem, and I do get tired.
I may know somebody.
What?
Who may be able to help you that, Mike, that you've at least talked with before. Let me have somebody that you've had as a guest before that is a friend of mine who is a master's, an Ivy League master's in this stuff. Let me have him call you, and I'm sure he may be listening now, as a matter of fact, but I don't want to say his name over the air, but you've had him as a guest. At any rate, I'll get over to him and let him know, ask if he can help you out.
Yeah, if he could take a look at this and try and find out what's going on. Let's see. Somebody just wrote in, they don't get the pop-ups, but they also cannot get to the site unless they go through K-Proxy. Let's see. No Amazon pop-ups. We've allowed our technology to become way too complex, and those of us who are just trying to use it to get some work done, it's really impossible to figure it on out. For those who have large businesses that have staffs working on how to muck things up, apparently it's a lot easier for them. It stays like this. I really do miss my Commodore VIC-20, which is up there on the shelf and it still works. But
yeah, hey, listen, go back to shortwave, Mike. I think that's where we're heading.
Yeah.
But at any rate, listen.
I think so. All right. Well, listen, thanks an awful lot for the phone call, Peter. And to those of you who are dealing with this issue, my apologies. I am really struggling to try and identify where this is coming from and deal with them. Okay. Getting on back to the computer news here. Apparently, getting back to the issue of net neutrality, where the big companies get the lion's share. Apparently, Netflix is eating up the world's bandwidth as more and more video goes to streaming. Right now, video accounts for 58% of the total downstream traffic on the internet, followed by web browsing, gaming, and social media. But the video is definitely there at the top. And the American internet isn't really keeping up with that. That's why they went for this whole thing of ending net neutrality. It's cheaper to take bandwidth away from small people than to actually upgrade the system. I mean, if you were in Japan, they have gigabit into the home at the consumer level. That's how far ahead they are. Okay, over in Israel, they are launching an internet command center to monitor social media. And they're going to be out there looking for anybody who dares say anything bad about the government of Israel. And what this amounts to, this is an attempt to shut down freedom of speech in America. They want that First Amendment to go away. The Anti-Defamation League, they have a $64 million operating budget, and they are just hammering this issue of limiting free speech, and saying that there has to be an Israel exception to the First Amendment. And no, there are no exceptions to the First Amendment. The First Amendment recognizes our right to criticize government, any government at all, anywhere on planet Earth. And if Israel succeeds in carving out an exception for Israel in the First Amendment, there'll be others. There'll be a vaccine exception. You can't criticize vaccines, or you can't criticize GMO. And the great promise of what the internet was going to be is being taken away from us bit by bit. They're trying to just turn it back into another content delivery platform, another sales pitch machine, and to try and silence the voices that are out here trying to bring some sanity back to the discussion here. All right. The TSA had a facial recognition experiment, and it scored 85% accuracy. Huzzah, huzzah, 85%, that's pretty good. Well, not if you're one of the 15% who false positive. That's what's really scary about all this stuff. They're putting it out when it isn't working perfectly. The idea is, it's great, it's wonderful, it's the latest thing. And yeah, it doesn't always work, but you got it. It's just so wonderful that we've got this new technology. Nestle is back in the news again. This has to do with the Six Nations up in, well, again, these people living on the Six Nations treaty land, they don't have adequate water. And Nestle is being allowed to extract millions of liters from their land, just drying it out underneath them. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently not satisfied with all the money they're making now. There's now a new push to recommend the HPV vaccine for people aged 27 to 45. It's just money, 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 money. All right. story coming out of NBC News. There are now 13 states with active investigations of sexual abuse linked to the Catholic Church. Florida is the latest one to announce a statewide investigation. Apparently, NBC contacted officials in all 50 states and D.C. and found 13 with these statewide probes. Not just a single incident, not just a single church. They're literally investigating everything in the state here. Okay, so we're only a couple of weeks into autumn, and snow is coming down, and already the corporate media is out there screaming about human-caused global warming, and they brought back the old canard that human-caused global warming is why we have freezing cold weather. You know, don't doubt the original claim. Don't doubt that there's human-caused global warming. Just, yes, there's snow, but it's caused by the global warming. They're pushing that one. So it's snowing in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It's been snowing over at Whistler Blackcomb. Apparently up in Canada, the Arctic sea ice has arrived early, and it's now blocked shipping to 3 isolated communities. They can't get the delivery barges through there, and so now Canada is scrambling on how they can transport critical supplies up there. Probably going to have to do it by air, or bring back the ice road truckers. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is releasing their new report, SR number 15. And again, we need a carbon tax. We need control of everybody's life. There's only a problem. The data set, the largest global temperature data set out there, has been audited for the very, very first time. It's the HAD-CRUT4 database. It was found to be so riddled with errors and outright improbable data that is, for all intents and purposes, useless. It's completely useless. Now, whether that's just mistakes or all these people trying to fudge the data, but it doesn't hold up. And this is what consensus science brings you. Groupthink and no quality control. Oh yes, we believe, St. Al of the Gore. Global warming, global warming. All right, we're going to take a break here for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So we're talking about human-caused global warming. The IPCC is coming out with another report saying we're all on the edge of doom unless you let the United Nations tell you how to live your life. And the United Nations came out with a statement: there are only 12 years left to turn climate around, or we're all going to die. More doomsaying. So, with that in mind, let's go back and look at some of the other doom and gloom predictions that we have been fed relative to human-caused global warming. Remember when back on March 20th, 2000, the UK Independent was reporting snowfalls are now a thing of the past. And we've had several record-setting winters since then. Now, scientist Paul Ehrlich says that in the next 10 years, global warming will kill 200 million people annually. Now, he said that back in 1970. And, of course, it did not happen. In 1970, left-wing liberal scientists reported in Life magazine, global warming will reduce the amount of sunlight reaching Earth by 1/2 by the year 1985. Needless to say, that did not happen. During the first Earth Day in 1970, left-wing liberal scientists warned that global warming will cause 80% of all life on Earth to die by the year 1995. That did not happen. Again, in 1970, left-wing liberal scientist Kenneth Watt predicted that global warming would cause an ice age in the year 2000. So we continue to see all of this nonsense that's being spewed on out to scare you into going along with the agenda. And if you've been paying attention the last several winters, you know we're not dealing with global warming. The planet is cooling, and it's probably going to get a lot worse because of the decline in solar output. Now, Al Gore predicted that in 10 years, global warming will make the surface of the planet unlivable for all mankind by making it a total frying pan. He said that in 2006. In 2008, Al Gore proclaimed that the polar ice caps would be completely melted by global warming by the year 2013. And that didn't happen. It's just a huge amount of nonsense. And what they're trying to do is sell this idea that global warming at the Arctic is melting all the ice and sending freezing cold air down, which is causing cold weather down here. It really doesn't work that way, simply because once the snow and ice is melted, the air involved has to be above the freezing temperature. And yet we're getting snow. It's a joke, it's a hoax. Over here in Hawaii, people down on the Big Island got a little bit of a start, as it were. The Kilauea volcano briefly woke up again. Fissure 8 started sending out sparks, but it doesn't look like it's going to turn into what we saw before, with all these buildings being eaten. And the U.S. Geological Survey is basically saying they're now on the lowest level alert for the volcano. And the good news is the tourists are returning. The Hawaii National Park, Volcano National Park, has set up new trails to look at the volcano, and people are down there. They're walking around, and so the economy is coming back for the town of Volcano. So that's a good thing. Now, here is a little bit of idiocy, and I'm really having a hard time thinking that this originated with NASA. But according to the Express in Great Britain, NASA has a plan to save the world from the Yellowstone supervolcano. And NASA is saying they will drill into the sides of the supervolcano in order to pump water down under high pressure to lower the temperature of the volcano and prevent a future supervolcano eruption, which would devastate humanity, which, yes, it certainly would. I don't know who did the math on this, okay? But you need to understand how much molten rock is down there, and what an absolutely insignificant amount of cooling you're going to accomplish pumping water down those holes. And you need to be very, very careful about pricking the sides of a volcano. Bad things could happen. It's a dumb, unworkable idea. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So again, this NASA plan to thwart the Yellowstone supervolcano. They're going to drill pipes into it, pump in water. You'd need to pump in half the world's oceans to even begin to have some kind of an effect. And what's going to happen when all that water starts turning to steam? You could actually crack the rock over the top of the volcano. You could actually trigger an explosion by increasing that pressure. I don't know who dreamed this up, if they're really with NASA or this is just the Express, with fake news. But it's not a workable idea. There really isn't any way to stop Yellowstone. When it decides to go, it's going to go. I mean, they knew that Mount St. Helens was getting ready to blow, for weeks before it actually happened. There wasn't a thing they could do about it. Mother Nature is in charge. They just learned that on the Big Island. They're about to learn that on the Florida Panhandle. Humankind likes to imagine itself at the pinnacle of its science and technology, and yes, we've done some pretty amazing things, but we are not really able to significantly affect the universe around us. We're not able to regulate the output of the sun. We're not able to change the shape of the Earth's orbit. We can't even clean up our own nuclear waste at this point. Over in Indonesia, speaking of Mother Nature being in charge, the death toll from the Indonesian quakes and the tsunami has now reached 1,944. And apparently they've decided it's time to call off the search for any more survivors. It's been too long, and they're going to start trying to clean up the mess and rebuild. Now, Jeff Bezos, along with all the other things that he's doing, he has a company called Blue Origin, which is a competitor with SpaceX, a privatized space company. And apparently, Bezos has signed a letter of intent with German aerospace companies OHB Space Systems and Security and MT Aerospace at the 69th Annual International Aeronautical Congress in Germany on Tuesday. The contract is for Blue Origin to send several metric tons of cargo to the surface of the moon in the next 5 years, suggesting that these German companies are considering building a permanent base on the moon, which would be kind of cool. Astronomers have discovered what they're calling the Goblin. It's a dwarf planet. It's way, way out there. And they're still looking for this mysterious extrasolar object that continues to distort the orbits of the planets. And I even remember back when I was at the Table Mountain Observatory, there was, back then they called it the 10th planet search because Pluto was still considered a planet, giving my age away here. And they've been trying to solve this problem. And they've managed to discover this little icy world. It's 300 kilometers across. It's in a very elongated orbit. At its very closest, it gets about 2.5 times as far from the sun as Pluto. Then it heads out to the outermost fringes of the solar system to almost 60 times further out than Pluto. It takes 40,000 years to loop once around the sun. And obviously, for 99% of its orbit, it would be too faint to see with our present astronomical instruments. But they're going to try and track this object and see if they can refine their calculations as to where this second, this planet 9, the new planet, planet unknown, may be. I have another theory. And this goes back to the article I wrote on how the Big Bang is just religion disguised as science. As you know, one of the pieces of evidence held up for the Big Bang Theory is the so-called cosmic background radiation. But there's a little bit of a problem. When the Kobe satellite went on up to listen for the cosmic background radiation, the theory said that it would be an absolutely featureless shell surrounding the universe, which makes sense because in the theory of the Big Bang, it emerged from a singularity. There should be no differentiation everywhere. But what Kobe found was a very complex structure in this background radiation. Well, we don't really know how far this radiation is away from Earth, and it might also be a lot closer. So here is my theory, and that is that our sun was once part of a binary star system. And we know now from some of the discoveries made with Kepler that it is possible to have binary star systems with stable planetary groups. And so my competing theory here is that sometime long ago, our partner star, if you will, exhausted its fuel and exploded and created a planetary nebula, like you would see in the constellation of Lyra. Well, that planetary nebula has been spreading out and spreading out and spreading out, as they all do. And what Kobe found was not the cosmic background radiation, but the remnants of the planetary nebula from that earlier star's explosion. Because we know somewhere near us there had to be a stellar explosion to explain the presence of the heavier elements in our own solar system. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Paul in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Michael, I really like it when you talk about scientific matters. And there's a few points I'd like to make. They're kind of different points. But one had to do with, I heard a caller last week, and I hear a lot of these guys, they fret about the coming 5G, you know, of the internet connections. And I'd like to remind people, and I'm very skeptical when I listen to these people doubting it, because none of the critics of 5G have actually, you know, either bought or rented a spectrum analyzer to see the amplitude of the signals and what is being radiated.
Yes.
Because that can be quantified, that can be measured. If you get yourself a spectrum analyzer, you'll know about the overall amplitude at that different you know, frequency in the spectrum. And so, because a lot of these people never do the scientific work to actually quantify or measure the radiation being emitted, whether it was either from the 5 gig or from the wireless routers or from you know, the sensors to the electrical grid. Remember that a while ago? They were concerned about. And my point is, they would have a more compelling case if they either, you know, like quantified, got themselves a spectrum analyzer, you know, hired an electronic engineer. It's expensive, and basically put out a report about it. You know, and none of them seem to either mention the inverse square law. You know, which is basically that as you get further away from a radiation source, the amplitude of the radiation drops off precipitously.
Yes.
And you can quantify it. I don't know if a Gauss meter would work for measuring 5 gigahertz bandwidth.
No, I don't believe that it would. I don't believe that it would. But, you know, what you're seeing being bandied around the internet are, you know, scare tactic articles like 5G uses the same frequency as the Pentagon's human controlling ray gun. But as you pointed out correctly, the difference is the amplitude. Because any radio of any frequency can be deadly if it's coming at you in megawatt power. But the whole point of these tightly networked antenna is they don't put out a lot of radio energy. And the whole idea is supposedly, you know, it's going to be safe. I really do think that a lot of this hysteria about 5G is an organized PR campaign from the 4G companies who are afraid of losing business.
Interesting. But the thing about it is, it can be quantified, and there is, you know, there are spectrum analyzers. It's actually one of the reasons why I won't buy a cell phone. I'm waiting for when cell phones have spectrum analyzers built into them. Then I'll be impressed with it, because I think that would be, you know, I think that would be a killer app, because I would love to know, like, if I had a cell phone and I'm walking around through the course of the day, like what ambient radiation I am accumulating and exposed to through the course of the day. I'd love to have that all quantified in a daily report, you know? I think that would be a killer app, but I think the technology isn't there yet to get a spectrum analyzer into your cell phone.
Well, there would have to be an add-on device that plugged into like the lightning port to give it the necessary sensors. But again, the totality of our exposure to electromagnetic radiation is something that should be looked at, and there are no numbers for it. Fingers are being pointed at the Wi-Fi routers, at the 5G phones, and this and that. But it's more than that. It's the AM radio, FM radio, CB. There's no more CB. It's a different name now. Radars, especially, they're very high powered, and what are going to be the effects of all of this? Now, of course, electromagnetic radiation does not accumulate in the body. It's on or it's off. And at very low energies, in theory, it should be harmless. That's what they were saying about those airport scanners. And then it was discovered a new phenomenon called magnetic resonance, where radio waves at much lower energy than needed to break the molecular bonds, i.e. cook them, could actually shake the molecules to the point where they would break. Again, it's easy to say it's going to be 5G, it's going to be this, it's going to be the smart meters. It's everything all at once going on that saturates it. And we're never going to find out about that, because you have all these large corporations who are making money off of AM radio or FM radio or TV over-the-air broadcast. And the military is not going to give up their radars. And, unless you build your own home and turn it into a Faraday cage, it's just one of those things where you can fret about it and you can worry about it, but that's going to be about it.
Yeah, and people need to consider also just the sun itself, because you want to talk about the number one radiation source out there, it's the sun, and people who live in higher altitudes are going to be way more exposed to radiation through the course of the lifetime. Like if you live in Denver and you're a mile high,
yep,
versus people who live at sea level, so that's always a factor too.
Well, people who live at higher altitudes are also more exposed to cosmic rays.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, one last point I wanted to bring up. I just like to throw this idea out to you, because I always thought this about volcanoes. Hope you don't mind, but you have the one in Italy, Mount Etna. I guess it's in Sicily.
Yes.
And I always thought, like, if they had bulldozers and just carved off the top constantly, like took that aggregate off the top and just sent it down, like maybe a rail line, and dump it to make more, like coastal land, right? Whether that would reduce the overall pressure on the volcano. In a sense, you would be harvesting magma from it. So if you knock several thousand feet, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Off the top of Mount Etna, right?
Okay, Paul, I got to put you on hold.
Yeah.
Paul, I got to put you on hold.
Right,
We've got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Paul in New Jersey. We're talking about his suggestion of using large earth-moving equipment to very gently shave off the top of a volcano, take it on down, use it for landfill, and that this will somehow reduce the pressure on the volcano. Well, no. The pressure that makes a volcano erupt originates deep, deep underground. The pressure from the overburden on the volcanic cone represents the cork in the bottle. And assuming that the volcano is not dormant or extinct, you could actually trigger an eruption by removing enough of that overburden, because there'd be less pressure holding it in check.
Well, by the way, to let you know, I've been to Hawaii, to the mainland. And I went to Mauna Kea. We hiked up that.
Yes.
And I heard that that after a volcano gets so high that the pressure from the magma below finds a new outlet. And in the case of Hawaii, there's a new volcano south of the main island coming up under
Loihi.
the seafloor now.
Loihi.
Yeah.
Well, that's basically where Kilauea came
yeah.
from. I mean, because Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea are so high, as the hot spot, as the Big Island moved northwest over the hot spot, it forced out a new vent on Kilauea.
Yeah, but it just seems to me that volcanoes can only get so high, and then when they get too high, the source of the pressure finds a new outlet. That's why my suggestion about scraping off the tops of volcanoes is it'd be an interesting experiment. I'd love to see them do it over there in Stromboli or somewhere.
Well, I foresee some major logistics issues, first of all, and again, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's what happened on this last eruption. Rather than have the lava coming up out of Kilauea, it basically found a new path down through all those fissures into the residential area. Fissure number 8, that's the new vent. It's not a new volcano. A lot of people were trying to claim it was a new volcano, but it isn't, because it's part of the same system. But that's exactly what happens. And you'll see that in all of Hawaii's volcanoes if you ever go to Maui and visit Haleakala, and you're going to see all these little tiny cones all over, and they're all part of the same system. It was just the magma finding the path of least resistance to the surface here. And you're right, there is a new volcanic island forming on the floor of the Pacific Ocean south of the Big Island. It's called Loihi, and it's going to be quite a while before it breaks the surface of the ocean, but everybody knows it's down there.
Yeah. Anyway, you're lucky to live there. Anyway, thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Jeff in Twin Cities. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I talked to you last week a little bit about the homeless camp, and on Sunday I was driving around, and like I say, this is a camp that is set up basically on the east side of Hiawatha Avenue, which is one of the paths, the old Indian paths from like the river downtown Minneapolis all the way out to the Minnehaha Falls. And so I noticed that there's like one of these freeway walls, and the camp is set up outside of that, and they've got like these police trailer with spotlights up, and they're on the south end of the camp. They're on all night long. And then south of there, there's streets, and then they put up the freeway wall again, and now I notice there's a lot of tents there. And then to the north of the area is what's called Franklin Avenue, which is an old streetcar line that runs east and south between Minneapolis and St. Paul. And there is space from the south of the sidewalk up until the freeway wall, and now there's tents there, and there's also tents across the street in the median. There's a median between Franklin Avenue east and west, a grass path or whatever you call it. And so there's tents everywhere. And I had a lady, I'm a cab driver, and this lady from Chicago says that these people are doing this because by staying in tents, their benefit money goes to them and not to the landlord that they might have if they had one that would rent them an apartment. And there's a serious backlog in available housing for all the people that are on benefits but are waiting for housing. This lady tells me she lives in a shelter that's an old haunted nunnery for $800 a month, and then I have all these people that are in alcohol and drug treatment, and they're paying an average of $750 a month to live amongst 10 or 12 people in a single family home that is now in the drug rehabilitation business, which is the business in Minneapolis. Everybody comes to get off drugs, alcohol, counseling, rebuild their lives, all the way back to Sister Kennedy and the water cures and all that. But anyway, it's getting cold here. I don't know what's going to happen.
Winter's coming here. Anyway, Jeff, got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back.
All right, I'll keep you up to date. Bye-bye.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking science and health news. And over at CERN, they have the Large Hadron Collider, which apparently has gone through yet another upgrade to increase its power. And once again, we're hearing scientists express concern that they're really operating in the dark. Now, before, we've had people expressing concern about the accidental creation of what would be called a quantum black hole, which is enough mass to form a singularity, but it's not the size of a planet. It's microscopic, hence the name of quantum black hole. Such a particle, of course, would be impossible to hold, would be very heavy, very dense. It would just drop down through the accelerator, through the floor, and into the earth, and start slowly gobbling up the earth. In fact, there was a science fiction novel that was based on that. In fact, I think it was by the same guy who did the Da Vinci Code, one of his first works. But now there's a new scientist out there, Sarah Knapton, reporting in the Telegraph says there is the possibility that the quarks generated in this accelerator will form themselves into compressed objects called strangelets. And that in itself would be harmless. However, there is a theory out there that a strangelet could, by contagion, convert anything else it encounters into a new form of super dense matter, transforming the entire Earth into a hyperdense sphere about 100 meters across. Now, it's not a black hole, it's not a singularity, but it's definitely something along the lines of a neutron star, or a neutron planet in this particular case. And sometimes it seems like science does get a little reckless, and I hope the people at CERN are keeping an eye on all of this. But again, I want to go back to my primary concern about this high energy research, and that is that it may be spinning a fantasy world. Particle physicists like to joke that particle physics is like taking two mechanical clocks and smashing them together and then try to guess what the clocks look like by all the springs and gears that fly on out. That's what the atom smasher does. It bangs the two clocks together. But to take the analogy a little bit further, you could argue that at enough of an impact speed, the individual teeth on the gears would break off and fly out as separate, discrete particles, even though you know that prior to the impact, they were not so. So my question is, and this gets back to my concerns about the so-called God particle, are we really seeing a new face of nature coming out of this machine, or are we seeing artifacts of the experimental process itself? Because they're down at a level where they're dealing with these particles that nobody can prove ever existed before the experiment ran. And I understand the golden rule of science, whoever's got the gold makes the science, and these big projects are money makers. The money is pouring on in, the scientists are making decent living at it, and it looks really impressive, and it's national prestige. But I wish somebody would seriously be asking, just what is it that's coming on out of these collisions, these near light speed collisions? Is it really something new, or is it something that's actually created by the collider? Because if it's just being created by the collider, then it's not part of nature. Anyway, as you know, Japan launched a space probe to the asteroid Ryugu, and the spaceship dropped a hopping robot. The gravity is so light on this asteroid that they couldn't use wheels or treads because the probe could actually throw itself back off into space. So they dropped this robot there, and they got all kinds of amazing photos. The little hopping lander ran for 17 hours. It was on a non-rechargeable lithium oxide battery. So that's all it was supposed to last. But they got a whole bunch of pictures. And good for the Japanese here. Now, here is an interesting little story. And we've seen these before. This came out in Natural News. And it's reporting on how a trio of researchers, Helen Pluckrose, a researcher and author, James Lindsay, an author with a doctorate in mathematics, and Peter Boghossian, a philosophy professor, set out to prove that academic bias has all but totally delegitimized the scientific process. And boy, did they succeed. Apparently, these three individuals wrote up a whole bunch of totally bogus scholarly papers pushing the liberal agenda. And unfortunately, I can't describe some of what was in there, again, because of FCC rules and regulations. But they were able to get 7 of these fake studies accepted for publication. 4 are already published online. 7 more are said to be under review. And these were articles that dealt with transphobia and improving men's understanding of feminist values. And oh yes, that's what we're going to publish. So you have this ideological bias where nonsense articles, these articles were written to be junk. They were written to be nonsensical, and they still got published. And then you have the monetary bias, where scientists are being paid by pharmaceutical companies to write scholarly articles that promote the pharmaceutical industry's products. And it is corrupting science. It absolutely is corrupting science. We see that with human-caused global warming. The database everybody was relying on was found to be just loaded with errors. There was one time when one of the satellites that was supposed to be monitoring the temperature data set, the temperature of the Earth, was sending in these very high numbers. And everybody said, oh, there it is. There's the proof Earth is warming. Then it turned out the sensor on the satellite was defective. And even though NOAA deleted that data from their servers, the promoters of global warming still use it, as was seen in the data from this satellite. And that's not science anymore. That's politics. It's a scam. And I wish our public schools were teaching better science to our kids. Scientific method. Not what to think, but how to think. I think that would be absolutely essential. Okay, as you know, the Catholic Church, I think we mentioned it earlier in the show, 13 states now have statewide investigations of sex abuse related to the Catholic Church. And by the way, this is not a problem that is exclusive to the Catholic Church. It's certainly very prevalent there, but other religions have these issues as well. So now the Vatican is taking off the gloves, and they're going after Cardinal Mark Quillette, who basically wrote a public letter calling on Pope Francis to resign for covering up sexual misconduct by a senior American churchman. And actually, it was Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano that made the accusation that Pope Francis should resign. And the cardinal is saying it's calumny and defamation. And say, this is just an attack on Pope Francis. It's a political frame job devoid of real foundation. So they're getting a little bit testy over there. Meanwhile, the Pope himself is saying it's all the fault of the devil, and the devil is alive and well and working overtime to undermine the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope is so convinced that Satan is to blame for the sexual abuse crisis that he's asked Catholics around the world to recite a special prayer every day in October to try and beat back the devil. They do have a real problem there. Meanwhile, leaders of the Catholic Church in Nova Scotia are asking forgiveness for, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, the Mi'kmaq, for the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School. Remember, that's been a big problem all across Canada. It was a big scandal when it blew on up. The priest who tried to expose all of this was actually kicked out of the church. But at least they've gone through the process here where it's forgiveness and reconciliation. Maybe. I don't know. That's an awful lot of abuse there. Voyager 2 is now nearing the interstellar, the boundary with interstellar space. It's called the heliopause. Voyager 1 already went past it. Voyager 2 is now nearing it. And it's a little less than 11 billion miles from Earth. And NASA is saying the craft has detected an increase in cosmic rays that originate outside our solar system. So we're still getting data from it, which is just absolutely amazing. And I got to tell you, that makes me feel old, because when I was working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, I saw these spacecraft being built. There's a little window, a gallery over the spacecraft assembly area, which is a clean room area, but you're allowed to go up there and just peek through the window at what they're working on. And I watched them putting these together. Wow, how long it's been here. It's been a bad period for NASA, unfortunately. You have the Opportunity rover on Mars is still not communicating. And as near as they can tell from the images from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, the dust storm left the rover piled high with dust, meaning the solar cells are not getting any light. So they're not expecting that one to come back. And NASA's talking about basically winding that mission down. Over at Curiosity, they have decided they're going to try and deal with their little glitch by switching back to the Side A computer. Now, Curiosity has two computers, Side A and Side B. And shortly after landing, the Side A computer malfunctioned, and they switched over to Side B, which has been running ever since. But now Side B has developed this problem where the rover is operating completely and is able to send and receive commands, but for some reason cannot forward the data from the sensors back to Earth. Meanwhile, during all this time, engineers have been working to revive the Side A computer, and while it doesn't have as much memory as it used to have, they're going to switch back over to Side A to get Curiosity up and running, and then try and use that to diagnose what's going on with Side B. So hopefully they'll get that one going. But again, these missions lasted a lot longer than originally planned. So you really can't say that this is a failure. Over at the Hubble Space Telescopes last Friday, one of the gyroscopes failed. And Hubble is now in safe mode. All non-essential systems are turned off. No science observations being done. And mission controllers are working to try and figure out how to get the 28-year-old telescope back up and running. Then you had the issue with, well, it's been a rough week for NASA, and I feel sorry for those people, because when you're working on that kind of a mission, it's not just the paycheck. I mean, you love what you're doing. You're excited by what you're doing. And you can get very emotionally caught up in all of it, which can have a good side in terms of motivation and dedication, can have a bad side. We had a flight controller sort of go through a breakdown at one point. So it's very intense and stressed. So let's see what else is going on out in the world here. To nobody's surprise, the online paid shilling is starting to pick up ahead of the midterm elections. There's a lot of money to be made if you're willing to be an online shill, which means having absolutely no moral compass or ethics whatsoever. And we talked about the limo driver being an FBI informant. Now here is a good one. Hermosa Elementary in Artesia, New Mexico is calling for police-grade surveillance technology to supposedly protect the students. And that includes gunshot detection systems. Well, by the time you're detecting the gunshot, it's too late. But they are putting in metal detectors and biometric locks requiring facial recognition or a person's iris. I think that's less about the protection of the students and more about conditioning the next generation to simply accept this total Orwellian world, where everywhere you go, you're identified and you're scanned. John Oliver apparently has leapt to the defense of George Soros, saying it's just a baseless conspiracy theory that Soros paid the Kavanaugh protesters. Well, we do know at one time there was that video where one of the people who was screaming at Kavanaugh in the hearing room walked outside and was handed a wad of cash. Somebody was paying this. And we know there's a lot of money being thrown on in here to try and steer the elections. There's no more will of the people. public relations firms exist to manipulate you, to get your vote for whoever they want. And lying is big business in the United States of America. So, getting on back to what we talked about at the top of the show, this whole Kavanaugh hearing business, it's a national disgrace. It's an absolute national disgrace. It has shown the American people and the rest of the world just how childish politicians can be, especially on the liberal Democratic side. And like I said, I was hoping this was all going to be over with the nomination, the confirmation, but apparently not. Apparently the Democrats cannot let it go, just the way Hillary cannot let go of the 2016 election. We're going to take a few words of commercials and then back with the last segment of today's show. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today. And apparently Saudi Arabia has reacted quite angrily to the accusation from Turkey that this dissident journalist was killed inside their consulate. They're saying it's a complete lie and nothing to it. So this is not going to help the situation between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. But apparently 15 journalists have disappeared just since last month. And this is from Reporters Without Borders. And obviously it's a concern if reporters are being kidnapped or worse, because it's cutting off the flow of information. And when you cut off the flow of information, all that's left is propaganda, which is what we are being fed daily. As George W. Bush said, we got to catapult the propaganda forward. Apparently, during today's Columbus Day festivities, liberals were starting to scream that we need to take down all the statues of Columbus because he brought disaster to the Native Americans. Actually, that was done by people who followed him. But again, this is a concerted attack on our history. Because if you can raise a population that has no sense of who they are, where they came from, or where they're going, they're easy to control. And that's definitely a big part of that that New World Order, that globalist agenda. So getting on back to Kavanaugh, mass hysteria as a spectator sport. And again, I'd like to see it go away, but I am very concerned. I mean, they're screaming about impeachment. What happens if the Democrats don't take the House in November? What if the Trump victory with Kavanaugh has galvanized the GOP voters and they get out of their house and they vote? And there's a good reason to, because if you look at the behavior of those Democrats in Congress, do you really want them to have control of the House of Representatives? So that's your assignment. Rivero's Rangers, you need to get out the Republican vote. And just say, after that spectacle that the Democrats put on in the Kavanaugh hearings, they're dangerous. This isn't just politics anymore, and my agenda and your agenda. The Democrats have become dangerous. And we know they're going to try everything they can to steal the election anyway. Illegal immigrants are voting. Apparently some of these polling places are now using wireless voting machines. Oh, trust us, they're secure. They can't be hacked into. Yeah. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. Use email, face-to-face, SneakerNet. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. If I can get enough money, I'll start shutting off some of these advertisers because I'm really fed up with them. So we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.